On my 10th wedding anniversary, I didn't get flowers. I didn't get love. I got divorce papers handed to me by my mother-in-law. But what I did next was something none of them ever saw coming. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you were watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. I still remember the first time I saw Adrian. I was 21, standing at a crowded bus stop after another long shift at the diner. My feet were aching, my apron smelled of fried onions, and all I wanted was to go home, shower, and collapse into bed. Then he looked at me. Just one glance, and I swear it felt like the noise of the city dulled for a second. He had this messy hair, a crooked grin, and the kind of eyes that made you feel like he was already laughing at a joke only the two of you would ever understand. He didn't have much. Honestly, neither did I. At that time, my life was just work, bills, and more work. I was juggling 2 jobs just to afford rent for a small, stuffy apartment that smelled like damp carpets, no matter how hard I scrubbed. Adrian was a dreamer. The kind of man who always had plans but never much to show for them. He drifted from job to job, picking things up and dropping them just as quickly. And yet, from the moment he spoke to me at that bus stop, I felt this strange pull, as if fate itself had reached out, tapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "This one." Adrian was funny in a way that didn't feel forced. He laughed recklessly with his whole body, like he didn't care who was listening. He talked about life as though it was some big adventure waiting for him, even if, at that moment, he barely had bus fare in his pocket. Looking back now, I guess I should have been cautious. A man with charm but no stability isn't exactly a safe bet. But when you're young, and your heart is starving for something bigger than bills and broken dreams, even crumbs of hope taste like a feast. He promised me the world. Not in grand gestures. He didn't have money for that. But in little ways. A note scribbled on the back of a receipt. Late-night walks where he painted pictures of the life we would build together. He spoke as if he already saw us 10 years ahead, happy, successful, in love. And foolish as it sounds, I believed him. We had nothing, but somehow with him it felt like we had everything. That's how we ended up married less than a year later. No fancy wedding, no flowers, no music. Just us standing in a cramped courthouse with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Our wedding rings came from a pawn shop downtown, scratched and slightly tarnished, but to us, they shone brighter than diamonds. I wore a white dress that wasn't even mine. A friend lent it to me, and it fit awkwardly, too big at the waist and dragging slightly at the hem. I didn't care. I stood there looking at Adrian, thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. I thought love was enough. I thought patience, loyalty, and sacrifice would be enough to hold us together, even when life got tough. And in the beginning, it was beautiful. We lived in a tiny apartment, barely enough space to turn around without bumping into each other, but we didn't mind. We would eat cheap instant noodles by candlelight, pretending it was fine dining. We'd laugh at our empty fridge and say things like, "One day, we'll fill it with steak and champagne." I didn't mind carrying more than my share. I didn't mind working long hours while he figured things out. Because in my heart, I believed in him. I thought, if I hold him up now, one day he'll do the same for me. But here's the part I didn't see coming. Sometimes the person you love most is the one who takes your sacrifices and mistakes them for weakness. Sometimes the very people you give everything to end up giving you nothing in return. If I could go back to that girl in the oversized white dress, standing in that courthouse with stars in her eyes, I would grab her by the shoulders and warn her. I'd tell her that love without respect is like a house without a foundation. It looks fine for a while, but the cracks always show. I didn't know then that the same man who held my hands so tightly at that courthouse would one day sit silently while his family humiliated me. That his mother would be the one to hand me divorce papers, with him standing by, watching. But that's a story for later. Tell me, have you ever loved someone so much that you ignored every red flag, convinced your love alone could save them? Because that's where my story begins. And trust me, it doesn't end the way I thought it would. Reality hit me fast. Love was sweet in the beginning, but love doesn't pay rent. Love doesn't keep the lights on or put food in the fridge. Bills stacked up on the kitchen counter like a tower I couldn't knock down. Groceries disappeared as quickly as I bought them. And while I worked long hours at the restaurant, sweat dripping down my back, feet aching so bad I wanted to cry, Adrian slept in. Most mornings I'd be slipping into my uniform just as he rolled over in bed. By the time I came back late in the afternoon, he was only just waking up, controller in hand, glued to his video games like he was competing for a trophy. He'd barely look up as I reheated leftovers from the diner, stretching yesterday's scraps into dinner for two, and on the nights when I came home exhausted from pulling a double shift, hair stuck to my face, legs throbbing, eyes heavy, what did I find? Not a clean kitchen, not a hot meal waiting, just dirty dishes stacked like towers in the sink, the trash overflowing, and Adrian sprawled on the couch with his headset on. Sometimes, he wouldn't even pause the game. He'd glance at me, grin lazily, and ask, "Babe, what's for dinner?" I can't explain the mix of anger and love that boiled inside me in those moments. Part of me wanted to scream, "Get up, help me, can't you see I'm drowning?" But another part of me, this foolish, hopeful part, kept whispering, "Be patient, he'll grow out of it. He just needs time." So I swallowed the frustration. I told myself it was just a phase. I convinced myself that one day he'd wake up, put away the controller, and finally take life seriously. That's the funny thing about love. It blinds you. It makes you mistake excuses for patience. It makes you ignore red flags until they're practically smacking you in the face. I defended him to everyone. When friends asked, "Why doesn't Adrian have a job yet?" I'd smile and say, "He's working on some projects." When my mom hinted that I was carrying the whole household on my back, I brushed it off. He'll find his footing soon. But deep down, I think I knew the truth. I was holding everything together by myself. And love, no matter how strong, starts to feel heavy when it's one-sided. There were nights I cried quietly in the shower, the hot water hiding my tears. Nights I looked at him asleep, snoring peacefully without a care in the world, and wondered if he even saw me. If he even realized how much of myself I was giving up just to keep us afloat. Still, I stayed. Because I loved him too deeply to walk away. Because when you've built your world around someone, the thought of leaving feels like tearing down the only home you know, even if that home is crumbling. I told myself, this is what marriage is. You sacrifice, you wait, you hold on, even when it's hard. And maybe some of you know what I mean. Maybe you've been there, carrying all the weight, hoping your partner will finally wake up and see you. But here's the thing. Sometimes people don't change just because you want them to. Sometimes they only change when life hands them something so big they can't ignore it. For Adrian, that moment came one afternoon, an ordinary day that didn't feel important at first. A day that would end up turning everything upside down. And I had no idea then that his sudden stroke of luck would be the beginning of my heartbreak. But let me ask you something. If you were in my shoes, would you have stayed as long as I did? Or would you have seen the red flags for what they were and walked away? Because I stayed. And my choice to stay cost me more than I ever imagined. Because everything changed. It happened on a night that started like any other. I was working the late shift at the diner, counting tips that barely covered the week's groceries, when Adrian came rushing in with a grin so wide I almost didn't recognize him. "You won't believe who I ran into today," he said breathlessly, sliding into one of the booths while I wiped down tables. I barely looked up. "Who?" "Damien. You remember me mentioning him? From college. The guy was always working on crazy projects, apps, gadgets, software. Well, he's done it. He's got this new product, and he wants me to partner with him." I blinked at him. "Partner?" "Adrian, you don't have any money to invest," he waved me off. "It's not about money. He wants my ideas, my vision. He says I've always been good at seeing the big picture." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But I had seen this before. So many plans, so many big ideas that went nowhere. I just smiled and said, "That's great, Adrian. I hope it works out this time." But this time, it really was different. Within months, their project took off like wildfire. Investors lined up, throwing money at them, orders poured in. The business grew faster than I could keep track of, and suddenly, Adrian wasn't just the man lying on the couch anymore. He was Adrian, the visionary. People who had once dismissed him, people who laughed at his lack of direction, were now hanging on to his every word. He spoke at events, shook hands with powerful people, and his face even appeared in a magazine once. Everything changed for us. We moved out of our tiny apartment into a bigger house with shiny floors and a backyard. Adrian bought not just one flashy car, but two. "Just because I can," he said with that same reckless laugh I'd once fallen in love with. At first, I thought our struggles had finally paid off. I thought, this is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for. All those nights I carried us, all the sacrifices, it's finally worth it. But I was wrong. Because with money came arrogance. And with success came a version of Adrian I didn't recognize anymore. It started small. Little comments, ones I brushed off. At family dinners, when someone asked about my job, Adrian would chuckle and say, "Can you believe she still waits tables with all the money I make now?" But she insists. The table would laugh, and I'd force a smile, my cheeks burning. His siblings joined in too. "What's it like serving burgers while your husband builds an empire?" one of them asked once. I wanted to snap back, but Adrian just smirked, proud of the joke. And then there was his mother, Estelle. She never liked me, not from the very beginning. She tolerated me when Adrian was broke because, I think, she assumed I'd be the one taking care of him. But now that he had money, she decided I wasn't good enough anymore. She'd glance at me across the table, her lips curling. "Adrian deserves someone who matches his level," she'd say, her voice sweet but sharp enough to cut. "Not a woman who smells of grease and works herself to the bone." The worst part? She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, and no one defended me. Not even Adrian. He'd just sit there, maybe even chuckle like it was no big deal. Do you know how it feels to sit in a room full of people who are supposed to be your family and realize you're nothing more than the punchline to their jokes? To watch the man you sacrificed everything for join in on the laughter? I bit my tongue. I told myself it was just pride talking. That success had gone to his head and he'd come back down eventually. I told myself to be patient, the same way I'd always been. But with each passing day, the man I married, the man who once held my hand in a courthouse with nothing but borrowed rings, disappeared further into the shadows of his ego. He started looking at me differently too. Not as a partner, not as the woman who carried him when he had nothing, but as baggage, something that didn't fit his new image. He bought expensive suits, went to fancy parties, met with people I didn't even know. And me? I was just the waitress wife he was too embarrassed to claim. At home, things weren't better. He'd come back late, smelling of expensive liquor and perfume I didn't wear. He stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing when I was exhausted, stopped caring. One night I asked him gently, "Adrian, do you even want me at these family dinners anymore?" He shrugged, eyes glued to his phone. "You're my wife. Of course you should be there, just maybe dress up more. Try not to talk about work so much. People don't really get the whole waitress thing." I stared at him, stunned. The whole waitress thing? That thing was what kept us alive for years. That thing was the reason he had food in his stomach and a roof over his head when his dreams were nothing but dust. And now he was embarrassed by it. By me. I wish I could say I stood up for myself right then and there. I wish I could say I walked away the moment he made me feel small. But the truth? I stayed. Because I still loved him. Or maybe I loved the version of him I remembered. The one who used to laugh with me in our tiny apartment. The one who dreamed of steak and champagne while we ate instant noodles. I kept telling myself he'd come back. That this arrogant, careless man wasn't really my husband. Just some stranger success had created. But deep down, I think I knew. The man I fell in love with was gone. And the worst part, I hadn't even hit rock bottom yet. because I thought the mocking, the insults, the humiliation were bad enough. But I had no idea what was waiting for me on our 10th wedding anniversary. Do you think you would have seen it coming? Because I didn't, not even a little. On our 10th anniversary, I wore the same dress I had on during our courthouse wedding, altered to fit, pressed neat. I thought maybe nostalgia could remind Adrian of the love we once shared. I was very excited about it because my husband had said he had a surprise for me. For a moment, I let myself imagine it was a candlelit dinner, or a weekend trip, or even just him holding my hand like he used to. I wanted so badly to believe. But when I walked into his family's mansion, I was met not with flowers or gifts, but with smirks. His siblings had their phones ready, cameras tilted toward me like I was some kind of joke they'd been waiting to record. And then Estelle, with her diamond-studded fingers, slid a folder across the table toward me. "Happy anniversary," she sneered. "Here are divorce papers. Do yourself a favor and let my son live the life he deserves." The room erupted in laughter. His brothers slapped each other on the back. His sisters whispered behind manicured hands. And Adrian, my Adrian, sat there, laughing with his camera in hand, ready to record my downfall. I felt my chest tighten, my vision blur. 10 years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of carrying the weight of our marriage. And this was my reward? I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why, to beg for even 1 ounce of the love I used to know. But instead, I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, but my signature was steady. I signed, and when I looked up, I smiled, because sometimes the greatest revenge is dignity. The room went still when they saw my smile. I don't think they expected it. Estelle leaned back, frowning, as if I'd broken the script she'd carefully written for me. Adrian shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and for the first time that night, his eyes flicked to mine. "You're not going to fight?" he asked quietly, almost like he was disappointed. I wanted to laugh at the irony. Now he wanted me to make a scene? To cry? To beg him not to leave? No. That part of me, the girl who believed in him more than he believed in himself, died long before this moment. Instead, I stood. My chair scraped against the marble floor, sharp and loud in the silence. I smoothed my dress, squared my shoulders, and said, "Thank you for the gift, Adrian." 10 years late, but freeing all the same. His siblings chuckled, but uneasily now. Estelle tried to mask her annoyance with another smirk, but I could see the crack in her expression. I had robbed her of the scene she wanted. The broken woman, humiliated and crawling out of their mansion in tears. Not tonight. I walked out with my head high. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and heavy, but it was nothing compared to the chill I'd just left behind. My heart was shattering inside me, but I refused to let them see. I kept walking until my heels pinched my feet and my body begged me to stop. I didn't care where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back, not to that mansion, not to Adrian, not to the woman I had been. At a quiet street corner, I finally let my tears fall. They ran hot and fast, blurring the glow of passing headlights, soaking the fabric of my dress. 10 years. 10 years of loyalty, love, and sacrifice, thrown in my face like trash. But as I stood there, something strange stirred inside me, a small, steady whisper beneath the grief. This isn't the end. This is the beginning. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, or how I would rebuild from nothing. But I knew one thing for certain: I had survived the worst of him. And surviving is its own kind of power. What I didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that life has a way of circling back. That dignity I chose, that smile I gave them, it would haunt them sooner than they ever imagined. And when that day came, they'd finally understand what it meant to lose me. Leaving that house was like walking away from a battlefield, carrying invisible wounds no one could see. I had nothing, no savings, no house, no husband, just the clothes on my back and the dignity in my chest. But I also had freedom. The first night was the hardest. I sat on a friend's couch, hugging my knees, wondering how my life had unraveled so quickly. My heart still expected Adrian to call, to show up, to say it was all just some sick joke. But the phone stayed silent. The man I had built a life around had erased me without a second thought. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I worked. I threw myself back into the restaurant. Double shifts, extra tables, whatever came my way, I took it. My feet blistered again, my back ached, but at least I was moving. At least I wasn't lying in bed replaying his betrayal over and over. Of course people talked, they always do. Didn't her husband just make millions, and she's still serving coffee? I'd hear them whisper. Some pitied me, others laughed. A few even sneered as if my divorce had been proof that I had never been good enough. But I kept going. Because sometimes, when all you have is ashes, you learn to build fire from scratch. I told myself, this pain won't last forever. One day, you'll be more than the woman who was left behind. I just didn't know that one day would come sooner than I thought. It was a rainy Thursday evening when he walked in. The kind of night where water streaked down the windows like tears, and the whole town seemed to move slower under the weight of the storm. He sat in my section, alone at a booth in the corner. His suit looked expensive, the fabric crisp and tailored, but his eyes looked tired, defeated. Like he was carrying a world on his shoulders. I gave him the usual greeting, placed a menu in front of him, and asked what he'd like. Just coffee, he murmured. For hours he sat there nursing the same cup. I checked on him every so often, refilled his mug, offered pie. He barely touched anything, just kept scribbling on a stack of papers. It was when I came over the third time that I noticed his hand. It shook as he tried to sign a document, the pen slipping across the page. Without thinking, I reached out and steadied it. "Rough day?" I asked softly. He looked at me then, really looked at me. His gaze lingered, heavy and searching, as if no one had asked him that in a long time. And then, slowly, the corners of his mouth lifted. "You have no idea," he said. There was something in his tone, not arrogance, not pity, just honesty, and for some reason it made me want to sit down and listen. But I didn't. I still had tables, still had bills, still had a life that was barely holding together. Instead, I brought him a slice of apple pie, on the house. He raised an eyebrow but didn't protest. And maybe it was the sugar, or maybe it was the kindness, but soon enough he started talking. He told me about work, about deals that fell through, about people who smiled to his face and betrayed him the second he turned around. He didn't mention names and I didn't press, but I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the kind of weariness that money can't fix. And so I listened. For an hour I stood by that booth, nodding, offering quiet words here and there. That sounds tough. I can't imagine. Sometimes people surprise you, don't they? His face softened as he spoke, like each word he let out made him a little lighter. By the time he left, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. He placed a $100 bill on the table, far more than the cost of coffee and pie. "You didn't have to listen," he said, slipping his papers into a leather briefcase. "Most people don't." I shrugged, tucking the bill into my apron. Sometimes all we need is someone to sit with us for a while, even if they're a stranger. He gave me that faint smile again, the kind that hides more than it shows, and then he was gone. I didn't know then that the man I had served was Elias Hart, the CEO of one of the fastest-growing hospitality chains in the country. I didn't know that my small act of kindness, my willingness to listen as he poured out his troubles over pie and black coffee, would change everything. But I would, because fate has a funny way of weaving people together, and that rainy night, with apple pie and trembling hands, was the start of something I never saw coming. Elias returned the next day, and the next. Always at the same booth in the corner, always with his papers and tired eyes. Sometimes we barely spoke, other times he would ask me about my day, my shifts, my life. He wasn't like most wealthy men I'd met. He listened, he noticed things. One evening, as I refilled his coffee, he asked, "Do you ever see yourself doing more than this?" I froze, pitcher in hand. No one had ever asked me that. Not Adrian, not his family, not even myself. I'd spent so long surviving that I'd forgotten what it felt like to dream. I used to, I admitted, setting the pot down. But life has a way of burning that out of you. Elias tilted his head, studying me. Or maybe life's just waiting for you to rise from the ashes. His words stayed with me long after his check was paid. Within weeks, Elias offered me a position at his company. Nothing glamorous, just an entry-level administrative role. It's a start, he said, sliding the contract toward me. You have more grit than half the people in my boardroom. I can teach skills. I can't teach that. I hesitated. Fear clawed at me. What if I failed? What if I wasn't good enough? But another voice whispered, what if you're more than you think? So I said yes. The work was demanding. Long hours, steep learning curves, responsibilities I'd never handled before. But this time, I wasn't invisible. My efforts were noticed, my ideas valued. Every late night spent reading manuals, every morning I showed up early, Elias saw it. And soon, others did too. Promotions came, slow at first, then faster. I went from answering phones to managing teams, from shadowing meetings to leading them. I absorbed everything, business strategies, negotiations, leadership. I learned to stand tall, to speak with confidence, to trust that my voice mattered. Years passed, and with each step, I shed the skin of the broken woman Adrian and his family had mocked. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The day I walked into a gala as a guest of honor, draped in a gown that shimmered under crystal chandeliers, Elias at my side, I felt the past finally loosen its grip. Cameras flashed. People greeted me with respect, admiration, even envy. And then, at the edge of the glittering crowd, I saw him. Adrian. For a moment my breath caught. He looked nothing like the man I once loved. The confidence, the arrogance, it was gone. His suit hung loose on him, like it had been borrowed or bought years ago. His eyes darted nervously, scanning the room not like he belonged, but like he was hoping no one would notice he didn't. Later, I would learn that Damien had pulled out of their partnership. Adrian's arrogance had driven investors away. His empire had crumbled, and with it, his pride. And standing slightly behind him was Estelle, my former mother-in-law, once the queen of every room she entered, now clutching a handbag too tight, her jewels dull in the harsh light. Her sneer had faded into desperation. They weren't there to celebrate me. They were there to survive. Estelle reached me first. She moved quickly through the crowd, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunfire. For a moment, I thought she might still carry that old sharpness, that venom. But when she stopped in front of me, her voice was trembling. "Darling," she said, forcing a smile that cracked at the edges. "We may have misjudged you." Behind her, Adrian shifted awkwardly, eyes fixed on the floor. His shame was written all over his face. "Adrian has been lost without you," Estelle continued. He talks about you often. We all do. We were wrong. We see that now." I stared at them. For a second, the old pain twisted inside me. Memories of late nights alone, of laughter at my expense, of divorce papers slid across a polished table. They had broken me once, and now they stood before me, begging. I smiled then. The same smile I wore when I signed those papers. Calm, controlled, untouchable. "You were right," I told her softly. "I wasn't fit to be with your son. I was destined for far more." Adrian's head shot up, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came out. His eyes met mine, and I swear, for the first time in years, I saw the boy I had once loved. The boy who had laughed with me on bus rides, who had promised me the world with empty pockets. But that boy was gone, buried beneath choices he could never undo. Elias stepped closer, resting a protective hand on my back. "Are they bothering you?" he asked, his voice low but firm. I glanced at Adrian, then at Estelle, her face pale, her lips trembling as she tried to maintain her composure. "Yes," I said simply. "They are." Elias nodded once and signaled to security. Within moments, 2 men in black suits approached, firm but polite. "This way, please," they said. Estelle's mask cracked completely. "Please, don't do this," she begged, her voice breaking. "We have nothing left. We need her. He needs her." Adrian reached forward, his hand half raised toward me. "Please," he whispered, barely audible, but I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I let security lead them out while their pleas echoed behind me, swallowed by the music and laughter of the gala. I turned back to Elias, lifting my glass, my smile steady. "Now," I said, "where were we?" And just like that, I walked forward, leaving them in the past where they belonged. Sometimes the people you sacrifice the most for will be the ones to betray you first. The divorce papers that were meant to humiliate me became my greatest liberation. I thought I was losing everything that night, but in truth, I was being set free, free to find myself, free to rise. Looking back, I realized that my silence, my dignity, my refusal to break in front of those who wanted to see me crumble, that was the revenge none of them ever saw coming. I didn't need to scream or fight or beg. I simply needed to live, to grow, to show the world that no one, not even the man I once loved, could decide my worth. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. That no matter how deeply you've been hurt, no matter how much you've lost, your story isn't over until you decide it is. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about resilience, dignity, and the quiet power of walking away. If you've ever felt broken, remember, you can rebuild stronger. And when you do, the world won't know what hit it. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next one. Your story might just be the next chapter we tell.